Hello, welcome to the Broken Not Broke interview, the leading podcast for families impacted by childhood cancer, hosted by a cancer parent. I know the situation is very difficult right now, I've been there, but I can tell you that the more information you have about childhood cancer and the resources that are available for you, the journey will be a little bit easier for you and your child. This is the purpose of the Broken Not Broke initiative and this podcast, to connect you to those resources and that information that can make a difference. Today, we're going to interview the CEO of St. Baldrick's Foundation, an impressive organization that does advocacy, supports research, and really raise awareness about childhood cancer. We're also going to have a financial tip and learn about financial toxicity. So let's start with the interview. We want to welcome to the Broken Not Broke interview our guest today. Kathleen Rudy is the Chief Executive Officer of the St. Baldrick's Foundation. Kathy, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Adrian. Thank you for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. What inspired the creation of St. Baldrick's and how that mission guides your work today?
Well, we were founded by three gentlemen who were in the same industry in New York, the reinsurance industry. They've been very successful in business. Two of them were immigrants from Ireland. The other was a grandson of immigrants from Ireland. And they realized they'd been very successful and needed to kind of pay it forward into society and do something to give back. One of them had a crazy mane of hair that they used to give him a lot of grief over. And so they decided to shave it, and they put the idea together because they had all known kids with cancer when they were growing up, and all those kids had died. And so they connected Enda's mane of hair and losing it with kids going through chemotherapy and losing their hair. And they decided, what if we could get other people to join us? So being Irishmen, they took over their industry's St. Patrick's Day party that was in New York. And since they were shaving their heads bald, St. Patrick's Day became St. Baldrick's Day. And fast forward now, 26 years, we funded $369 million in life-saving research through that program.
So that's such a great origin story, because you hear a lot, organizations that started because a parent or a family of a kid with cancer, after the diagnosis, the treatment. But the fact that they came from a different angle of knowing someone in their childhood, and the hair story is great. And I think it's a very inspiring story. The fact that they wanted to do something for these kids, and they created this organization that now is so successful. By multiple metrics, pediatric cancer is underfunded in terms of research. We'd love to hear some of the context, and also why funding from nonprofits like you is so important.
Well, you're right. It is underfunded because the vast majority of sick people are adults. And so just through the critical mass and the fact that adults have the power of the checkbook or the credit card, whatever, they can make gifts, they can vote and advocate and so forth. And sick kids can't do that for themselves. So you also have a mechanism where the pharmaceutical industry, what comes in at the end of the research pipeline, is looking at how do we serve the markets that we serve, how do we recoup our R&D costs and so forth. So pediatric markets, especially pediatric cancer markets, are not a promise to be able to cover their costs and stay in business. So they look to develop drugs that will allow them to stay in business as a business. So we have to look at different ways to incentivize companies to do that work and allow them to recoup their R&D in other places. And there's been a lot of smart legislation that's done that. But if you look at the philanthropic community, most philanthropic organizations are also focused on adult cancers for all the same reasons I just mentioned. So we really need grassroots efforts like the St. Baldrick's Foundation to be successful, and to provide that advocacy arm that goes and talks with government and makes sure that our legislative and our regulatory agencies are on the same page and doing smart things for kids with cancer so they don't get left behind. They're not a casualty of statistics and being outnumbered. So we really feel at the St. Baldrick's Foundation that if we focus on research, then we address the root problem, and the demand and the need for all the other ancillary services and support systems that help a family through a cancer diagnosis are lessened and alleviated, and the pressure is alleviated across the board, or lightened tremendously. So that's our focus on research and advocacy that helps the government fund more research and to make more effective policies around pediatric cancer drug development and access to research and care and all of that.
What's the criteria that you use, or how do you decide which applications to support?
It's hard. I will tell you, it's both exciting and tragic. There are so many phenomenal ideas out there and so many promising research projects, but sadly, we don't have the money to support everything that should be funded because we're still a small organization compared to a lot of the household charities whose names you know so well. So I should back up and say that we fund research from bench to bedside, as they say, from lab research to translational that gets it out of the lab and into patients to clinical trials. We fund infrastructure. We fund the training of young doctors to become researchers. We get them started in their early career as independent researchers as well. So we're trying to fund the full gamut. Every proposal, we don't say at the St. Baldrick's Foundation, oh, there's this problem in research and we're going to solve it. We say, here are these broad categories. Research community, you bring us your very best ideas. Each of those proposals then gets reviewed by at least 3 people. And if there's any disagreement amongst them, then it goes to an even wider group for further review. It's a process that's modeled on the National Cancer Institute's peer-reviewed system. So it's very rigorous, and it assures our donors and volunteers that at the end of the day, the stuff that comes out the other end that's reviewed and that is recommended scientifically for funding then goes to our board of directors, and they fund as far down the list of scores as they can before the money runs out. But that assures our donors and volunteers that their money is going to the very best research and the most promising ideas out there that will move the needle in the most dramatic fashion for kids.
Important to have a very specific process to make sure that the funders, the families know that how projects were funded. So based on what you have seen, you mentioned these promising ideas. What gives you the most hope today in terms of developments in research?
Well, there are many, and if I had a crystal ball, I could look forward into the future and say, this is the one to put all the money in or whatever, but it's probably going to be, as you know, we're talking about 100 plus diseases when you get down to the types and subtypes and everything, and they all interact uniquely with each child because of their unique genetic code. So unfortunately, it's not going to be one thing, it's going to be many. But I remember 25 years ago when I got into this work, pediatric oncologists were saying at that time, we really need a 4th weapon. They were talking about the 3-legged stool, and that supported research. And one leg was chemotherapy, another radiation, and the last was surgery. So, cutting, burning, and poisoning, basically. And all those things have very dramatic effects on a developing mind and body, as you can imagine. So they were talking about really needing a 4th weapon. And, lo and behold, all these years later, the St. Baldrick's Foundation was one of the early investors, if you will, in immunotherapy in pediatric cancer, harnessing the power of the body's immune system to fight cancer. And that has huge potential. We're very excited about that. It's been more efficacious of late in blood cancers, but they're working on ways to translate to solid tumors. So that's incredibly exciting. We see huge innovations in the way that treatments are administered as well. There was a trial that we studied in leukemia, where kids with a certain type of leukemia needed to get treatment over a 28-day period. And this trial allowed them to get their treatment rather than being in isolation through a backpack that they would carry on their body for 28 days, which is a bit daunting. It allowed them to live their life and go out again and have a life. So in terms of there's the survival that we're aiming for, but also the improved quality of life and allowing each child to fully participate in their life to the extent that that is possible and advisable. We have seen great progress by using new drugs or old drugs in new ways. That's been very promising. there was a study that we funded for acute myelogenous leukemia, and where they used a different drug, and it had been used in less than 1% of cases. Now it's in 98% of cases in AML, and that has incredibly improved their risk of heart disease. And so we don't think a lot about, well, the average person who's not in this world doesn't think about, oh my gosh, I'm getting cancer treatment, but my treatment could give me heart disease, and the treatment that saves your life puts you at risk in another way. So those things are very important, because if you survive your cancer, but then you die of something else, that's not a win to the family. The result is still you've lost your child, or you've lived a very compromised life because you have so much more sickness and illness. So I'd say there's a lot of different treatments that are huge. And I think that some of the genomics work and that genetics work holds great promise. And we need to support all of it, because some are going to be more efficacious in some diseases than others. It may help us get over the next plateau, and then we need something else to get to over the plateau after that. We need a combination of weapons. And I think that researchers now, the ones I mentioned that I met when I first started, would say, yeah, we need a fourth weapon. Well, we probably need dozens of weapons. We're in the process of discovering those and developing those.
Well, that really brings a lot of hope to families to hear that so many developments are happening and so many opportunities. Let's move now to advocacy and the community that you have created. And let's start with the fundraising events. St. Baldrick is known for the great and successful fundraising events. Could you tell us more about those and how why they're so effective?
Well, those events are really inspirational. We've often said it's the only fun you can have in childhood cancer, because they are so hope-filled. You have people from all walks of life, Adrian, who are coming together. You have small children to grandparents, and literally people in one event. You might have a plumber sitting next to the soccer coach, sitting next to a little girl who's, cutting her hair for the first time or shaving her head, next to a corporate CEO, and they're all in it together. It's very much an equalizer, because they're all having the same experience in that moment. What's empowering is that you don't have to pay to participate. It's not a fundraiser like, a gala or a golf tournament where you need a certain amount of money to be able to buy your way in and then support the charity. You just have to have a little hair or know someone who does. and you can come and participate, cheer them on, support them, whatever. And I think it's so transformative, because you experience an aspect of what the kids do when they're in treatment. So you feel, and I can say this because I've shaved twice now, and I felt much more authentic in my role by being able to experience what I'm asking other volunteers to do, what the kids have lived through. And you go out into the community and you see the looks that you get, and people looking at you and wondering, are you sick? Are you this? Are you that? But it's also empowering, because everybody you meet, you get to tell them what you did and why. And it's an opportunity to educate and inform and inspire people. And that doesn't leave you. And I have seen some of the biggest, toughest guys sit down in the chair, and maybe they got there because their buddy dared them to do it or something. And maybe they weren't totally dialed in yet to what they were doing it for, but they sit in that chair and they've just met a child with cancer at their vet, or they see one who's watching them shave and giggling and excited that they're shaving. And all of a sudden it comes home to them, and you can see the transformation while they're there, and they're so proud. And afterwards they'll say things like, oh my gosh, I'm yours for life. Like, it's just such a powerful experience.
I think for many parents, and I was in that situation, as soon as I knew my son was going to start treatment, I shaved my head as well, just for him to see that it was, something that others can go through. So when I saw your website on those events, I felt it was a fantastic idea. And then your angle of education, I think, is key. I mean, inspiring and motivation is good, but educating people is so important, because they are aware of cancer in kids, but they are not aware of many other things that happen to the family, both emotional and financial. Let's talk about policy. This month we heard about very important developments coming from Washington, D.C. Could you tell us more about the two legislations that passed, that Give Kids a Chance Act and Accelerating Kids Access to Care, your point of view on how can this make a change?
Yes, well, we're very excited, because we've been working on these for a while, and the Mikaela Naylon Give Kids a Chance Act is important, because there's more than 7,000 rare or orphan diseases, and And as we mentioned earlier, the drug makers are kind of hesitant to go into a space where they're not likely to cover their costs, let alone make a profit. And that's not a good recipe for staying in business. So this act provides a series of carrots and sticks, if you will, to incentivize drug makers to pay attention to space to orphan diseases, and all because they are less common than adult cancers. They're all pediatric cancers are considered orphan, and it provides them incentives, as I mentioned, but also to do it in a timely manner, because you don't want to have a drug sitting around for 20 years before someone decides, well, maybe we should let this be tested in children now. If you know it's safe and effective, then it should be utilized right away and made available for research and so forth, so that we can save more lives. We shouldn't have to make kids wait decades to then potentially save their life and start that process, because research is not an overnight process. It takes a long time, and it's very iterative to make sure that at each juncture, what changes you're making, are they effective or not? Are they harmful or not? So that is a hugely important piece of legislation. And then this Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act is the other one that just passed. And that's huge because there are many states where you don't have all of the potential childhood cancer treatments available in that state. They might be a more rural-based state, smaller cities, where they can't afford to support these massively expensive programs and treatment protocols. You've also got distance and so forth. That's, some states like Alaska, you have to travel a long way to get to an institution. And what this act does, the Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act, will make it easier for kids who are treated on Medicare or CHIP to travel across state lines to get treatment where they need it, when they need it. And we know, and you mentioned this a moment ago, that for every family who faces this diagnosis, it is not just the physical, there's the economic toll that it takes on you. Even if you're well insured, cancer is not an inexpensive treatment. For many kids, it's years long. You're going to have a whole lifetime of recurring scans and treatments and follow-up, because you're getting this treatment when your body and mind is still developing. We have to understand, and you need to know, how is the treatment affecting your development and your future life. And so all of these things are important. So the more we can reduce the economic impact on the family, the more they'll be able to weather that long-term journey, because it's very much a marathon, not a sprint to the end of that finish line. So that's hugely important. So those things that are going to help families access the treatment they need and hopefully get their kids to the status of survivor much sooner.
Well, I know that it has been a long time that or it took a long time for this legislation to pass, and that organizations like St. Baldrick were critical to advocate for them. So thank you for all the work that you did.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate to work with a lot of great advocacy partners. We have for many years now, about 10 years, been the co-chair of the Alliance for Childhood Cancer, which is kind of an ad hoc group of about 35 organizations that work together to develop legislation, to advance it, to work with regulatory agencies to make sure there's the smart policies for kids with cancer. The Alliance organizes Childhood Cancer Action Days, which is taking place in February. And it is an important time for families to travel to Washington to bring their voice to DC. We often talk, Adrienne, about it really stinks. It's rather unfair that families have to not only fight the cancer, but then have to go educate the world about it too, and as well as our leaders. But if you think about it, there's nobody more effective to do that, because you're hearing it from the proverbial horse's mouth. There's nobody who understands better and who can articulate better what is on the line and what the impact has been on a family. And the families of children with cancer are the ones who can bring it alive for everybody else and make them realize, there but for the grace of God go I, it could be my family. And we really do need to make this a national health priority. So I salute all the families who have been so dedicated to that advocacy process and to sharing their voices.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're in a situation with pediatric cancer, it seems that there's not enough time for anything. But the importance of outcomes like the one that happened this month is definitely worth it. So what's next within policy and systemic changes? What will be the next thing to advocate?
Well, there are a lot of things that I think in the community we're looking at. Initially, we're already working on the next federal fiscal year's appropriations to make sure the Childhood Cancer Star Act and the Child Cancer Data Initiative are fully funded. Last year, the administration advocated for doubling the federal investment in the Child Cancer Data Initiative, which is hugely important because the use of AI and data crunching and making sure that we're getting access and that we're coordinating the data will allow researchers to identify the promising pathways more quickly. So that is a huge sign that our leaders are paying attention to our needs and investing appropriately. Many in the field are looking at how do we help the FDA more closely work with the EMA in Europe, the European Medicines Agency, so that we get more collaboration and that there is more access to drugs and that researchers can work more quickly, and that what's available in Europe is available here, because we've heard many stories of kids having to go to Europe for treatment, but that's not a financial possibility for everybody. So how do we make sure that's what's going on in other places is available here? And we know that European medicine is on par with US medicine. So it's not like we have to question efficacy and safety guidelines and so forth. So how can we break down some of these barriers? And I think there are a lot of people doing that very thoughtfully. And we're interested to learn how the St. Baldrick's Foundation can do more of that. I think there's a bill called PDUFA, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, which is pending, and that would assess fees from the pharmaceutical agent companies to fund more FDA staff to review drugs faster, so they could then come to market faster. So that's an interesting one that we want to support. And I think anything that increases the available dollars for research is our number one driver. I'll take you back a number of years. About 2005, I was at a research conference, and researchers were talking very casually about, oh, well, the coming shortage of pediatric oncologists, like this is something that they heard about every day and it was old news. And I, excuse me, what? What are you talking about? And I'm like, are you talking about in the developing world? Are you talking about here? Like, they're like, oh, here in the United States, there's going to be a shortage of pediatric oncologists within 10 to 15 years. So we're already past that date. And what we see now is because, look, you get out of med school, committing to additional years on top of your fellowship and everything, your internship, your residency, whatever, additional years of training to become a researcher is a daunting prospect. You're delaying your earning potential, and you're going into a field in pediatric cancer where there isn't a lot of money available for your research. So you're sitting there looking at, I have to pay my malpractice insurance, I have to eat, I have to pay my rent, or hopefully someday a mortgage, I want to have a family of my own. How do I do that if I'm going into a field where there's nothing there? So we have to get the money for research up so that people will continue the work that's going on, and that they are trained and ready to carry on when the senior statesmen and women of the field now retire. So, that's really important. So I think making sure that we're training young investigators and equipping them to be successful and to build on the successes, that's huge. But then I would also say that issues of survivorship are equally important. We need kids to survive. We also want them to have a good quality life. We need to know that, a child who has a brain tumor can live independently and successfully. If they go through treatment, but they're never going to be able to cross the street safely on their own, then we haven't done as good a job as they deserve. And we can make our treatments better. So there's everything from making sure that the long-term costs of ongoing care and monitoring are covered and are insurance eligible, and people are not excluded from insurance because of that, and that you preserve your possibilities. We want kids to not be infertile after treatment. We want them to not have stunted growth or sensory deprivations or cognitive impairment. All of that's hugely important. So I think we're looking at the gamut, and I think what St. Baldrick's tries to do is take cues from the research community as to what makes sense to be next, because you can't, there are limits to the government dollars, and that's the main pot of money for pediatric cancer. So we've got to be smart about using the money strategically, because there are a lot of other jobs that government has. And so when we go, we've got to be able to prove that the field and the research is ready and we can justify that this is the next appropriate use of the dollars in research, but also that we're keeping the pipeline, I would almost say, not so prescribed that we allow the research the freedom to go where it takes us to, that we're not so narrow that we only go down one road and we miss a lot of other opportunities on the way, that there's latitude to let the research evolve and maybe surprise us in its potential.
Well, thank you for all those details in terms of what's next, and we encourage all families to be part of this important fight. Thank you so much for being with us today, Kathleen. It has been a fantastic conversation, very educational. I'm sure families will really benefit from it. I want to encourage everyone to learn more about St. Baldrick. Just go to your website. We'll have the caption of the website. Support, we participate, shave your head, and obviously donate if you can. Thank you so much, Kat.
Thank you, Adrian. It's been a pleasure.
Now let's talk about a very important concept, financial toxicity. This is a term coined to explain the financial shock that every patient and family diagnosed with cancer goes through. The shock happens immediately, is very acute in the short term, but unfortunately it lingers in the long term. That's very important because the economic and social mobility of families, the entire family, is impacted by cancer. I don't say this to scare you. I say this because it happens to every single family, regardless of income, assets, liabilities. Every one of us goes through financial toxicity, and it's important to understand it so we can take control of our finances as soon as possible. So find more information about this term, and there's a lot of organizations that provide financial assistance. You can find them at brokenNotbroke.org. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our producer, Vanessa Toro. Thank you to everyone who has supported the Broken Not Broke interview. More information in our socials, in our website, and please comment, share, like this video. The more families know about these resources, the better for our childhood cancer community. Goodbye.